Humans are not the most intelligent anymore.
He said, when love disappears, power appears.
That is a victimhood mentality.
And we talked a little bit also about the future.
So it's incredible that we accept this situation.
It's a great pleasure to be here, and I want to express how beautiful this experience has been and how beautiful the ideas are that have been expressed. And I think we should really appreciate that. One of the things that I think does make people unique is our appreciation for beauty. And it's not something that is talked about much in scientific circles, but I think that's something that does motivate us and sets us apart from the machines at the very least. Right, so the context of my talk, first of all, I am probably, I guess, the only New World representative on the question of individual sovereignty. And given that the New World, at least one of my New World countries, the one I was born and raised in, America, did fight for what it thought, or what its people thought was freedom, I guess that makes me somewhat have some position from which to speak about what that means. Although, of course, in Australia, yes, we like to bang our chests about how we were, you know, the larrikins and the anti-authoritarian sort of culture, but the reality is that even if you did choose to go to Australia, you were put in the position of making that choice by a British government. The British government gave you the choice to either waste away in a jail on the Thames that was probably pretty awful and would shorten your life by a couple decades, or take a boat to a brilliant, you know, amazing new world overseas that you didn't know much about, but maybe you could make a new life. So that does look like freedom, but is it freedom, I suppose, if you're choosing within the construct of that state? I also, many of you, of course, won't know this, but we have had our fights during the COVID period in Australia. You may think from what you read in the newspaper headlines that every Australian was very much pro-lockdown and pro-social distancing and masking and all the other nonsense. That was not true. There were a number of us who spoke out very vehemently in Australia from very early in the COVID era. I'm lucky to have friends, co-authors, and family members who were in support of that too. But I was called, of course, many things that I'm sure you guys were called as well, the granny killers and the, in my case also, Trump cannot. Yeah. So that was fun. One of the outputs of the COVID era is one of the books that you'll see out there on the table, which Paul and I and Michael Baker wrote in 2021. That was Brownstone Institute's first book. So some of you may know Brownstone Institute. It's a kind of libertarian think tank in the United States. It didn't exist when we were writing the Great COVID Panic. And we sent the manuscript to the person who then went on to found Brownstone, and it became Brownstone's first book. And now, of course, Brownstone has grown incredibly, and they have all these books on many different restoration topics. It's become, yeah, it's obviously the most successful libertarian think tank in terms of trajectory of growth in the US. And some of my best friends are libertarians. I am a professor, so I have to be very careful in my politics. I basically project the image of and try to remain truly apolitical in the sense of not taking a side of a political party. But I try to take a side, but it's a universalist sort of side. So since I'm from the New World, anybody know who that is?
That's cool.
So this woman, at least mythologically, her name was Anastasia. And she, I mean, there are many different stories. You know, Americans don't know their history. Although, I mean, I can find Australia on a map. There it is. But Americans are not known for being able to, you know, cite events and dates and happenings in history very accurately. We are mistaught and untaught quite a lot. So Jasper, your confusion of 4 years is nothing. You got nothing on me in that regard. But so we don't know exactly what happened with this woman. I mean, maybe if I dug enough into records, I could find out. But the basic point is she was a slave. She was born someplace, perhaps in South America, perhaps in Africa, but at some point ended up in slavery in the New World. And she was so impudent that to her masters, and she was so sure of herself, and you can sort of see in her eyes, she has this image of who she is that is simply not replicated in the institution of slavery. And she basically just kept talking, and she would incite other slaves to start thinking differently about their situation, start thinking differently about themselves. And so her master put her into this sort of contraption. So the contraption was apparently designed specifically to keep her silent, or at least that was the mythology. And of course the neck harness as well. But she retained her spirit. And so I wanted to go back to something that someone said this morning. I only put this image in at lunchtime to my slide deck because I thought it really encapsulated what someone said about how sovereignty is in the mind. This woman, I mean, we say we're enslaved to the state. Well, I don't feel like a slave, I can tell you that, right? I don't feel like a slave. And I'm sure that, you know, what Karen was speaking about this morning is very worthy of investigation, and probably legally in all sorts of ways. There's a lot of truth to that. But at the same time, freedom of oneself, which is what this salon is supposed to be about, individual sovereignty, is very much a mental construct. And she had that in her mind. She was more of a slave, certainly, than we are, and yet she managed to retain that idea. So I think it is possible to retain that idea and then to build from that. If she could have spoken, as we speak now, to each other, perhaps she could have started to incite and develop and grow a movement against the institution of slavery that she was subjected to. And I also like it because, of course, a black woman is pretty much the lowest of the low on the social hierarchy in the New World, right? And she would not accept that either. You know, I reject your hierarchy. I embrace something else. And I want to draw also a parallel here between political power and theological power, which Theo brought up and has come up a couple times, because in a sense she's not respecting the worldly political institutions that are surrounding her and enslaving her. What she is believing and adhering to and being inspired by is something much different than that, greater than that, and that gives her a sense of strength and value and self-appreciation, a kind of love, knowing that she is unconditionally valuable, which is the message from the Christian God. And I think it's, you know, probably something that inspires a lot of people. You know, when they are loved unconditionally in childhood, they carry that confidence through adulthood, and that empowers us to be able to make change that's positive in our lives. Anyway, Anastasia. So my talk today is entitled From Victimhood to Reclaiming Power, something like that. And I wanted to actually go through some of the ways in which victimhood, or the mentality of victimhood, because it is in the mind, can take hold of us and can start to color the way we see our world, and can then make a barrier in our life to actually achieving the changes that we want. And that means also changes in ourselves, changes in the way we relate to ourselves and the way we relate to others. So, of course, one obvious one would be to blame something else, right? I can't be expected to work because I have this problem, right? Or that guy is doing the wrong thing. I can't do things, you know, that you're asking me to do because he won't cooperate. I'm not able to change my such and such issue because I have this barrier. So that conception of being blocked, being frustrated, right? Usually when you feel that way, there is another way to see the situation in which that is not a barrier, but rather an opportunity. But it often takes a long time to finally see that. So that's one way to express being a victim mentally. Another one is to say, I was forced into a particular situation. So this wasn't my choice to get into this situation. Things happened and right? I was pushed here, and there I could not choose, you know, fully for myself anymore. I don't have full freedom, right? We will get later to what full freedom means. What do we mean when we say we want total individual liberty? What does that mean from a practical standpoint in terms of how we live our lives every day as human beings? What does it actually mean? But certainly this is a way of shrinking yourself. You'd like to get shrunk, think that way. Right? It's entirely his responsibility, right? Sorry, not my fault, not my game, not my area of expertise. Let them tell me whether I need to wear a mask. Let them tell me whether I need to have a vaccine. Let them tell me, right? I shouldn't have an opinion about this. It's not my right, not my role, not my right, not my space, not my lane. Right? That is a victimhood mentality. You are not taking agency. And I might even give a more controversial example here to say that if a young lady goes out in a very short skirt and a very low-cut blouse, that she is not in any way responsible for getting a catcall on the street. is ridiculous. That's a basic fact of human life. That woman is probably going to get a catcall, and she has agency in the situation. She has agency. She can help to change things if she wants to. She can choose to dress differently, and she will get a different reaction from the world. That's empowering of that woman to say that. But we have been led down the garden path to think that somehow it's anti-woman to say that, right? And that's all the man's responsibility. Men are toxically masculine and they're bad and all this. That is bad for women. That takes agency from them. And here's a final one, which some of the libertarians in the audience may squirm at a little bit. The presence of social norms, the presence of the government, the presence of the nation, the presence of my family's expectations constrains my freedom and my choice and my self-determination. Yeah? I mean, I can see how it's very seductive to want to say this. We look for reasons why we haven't achieved all that we've wanted to, or why we feel frustrated in our lives. This didn't work out the way I want. It's his fault. It's the state's fault. It's this fault. It's that fault. It's very typical. The scapegoating is a natural human impulse, but it's ultimately something that hurts us. It hurts our own framing of our role in the world and our potential in the world. So this is a huge problem in the West, not just Europe, the New World as well. We have invitations everywhere to take this kind of victimhood stance. So health crises, right? I'm the victim of a virus, or I'm, unable to make a choice because I'm not an expert. We have to go to the health experts or the government experts or the people who will know things. I will even go to the New York Times because they'll know, right? And I'll read what it is, right? It's almost opting out of being a real individual. It's like, no, I'll just be somebody who is a nodding head. I will just go along with the other things. But it's not what it looks like initially. We're invited to see something like a health crisis as a challenge for us to protect our families, protect our citizens, protect our grandmothers, etc. And if we don't do that, we must want to kill our grandmothers. That was kind of the logic. But it's one of these backwards pieces of logic, right? It's a twist around of everything, and then somehow, unless you think about what you're being told, you can be seduced into believing that lie. Men and women, again, the toxic masculine, or the women who can, just basically not do without any man, right? And the men who think they could do without any woman, right? This is, again, pretty fallacious. The partnership between men and women has been a bedrock of civilization since pretty much day dot. And it's not that, every man needs a woman or every woman needs a man, but in general, people do better when they have each other and they need both sides of what humanity offers. We collaborate together, we build more together. I noticed that all of the men spoke without sides today and both of the women spoke with sides. I don't know if that makes a difference, but we definitely have different perspectives, right, on the same thing often, different ways of approaching different concerns. And we benefit from having those exchanges. But again, there is all sorts of division being invited between the genders by modern culture and modern messaging. And even a sense of, well, maybe it isn't just men and women. Maybe there's this whole spectrum and people who are one could be the other and all this sort of thing. So it's, again, very confusing in that space. Environmental concerns, right? The climate is going down the toilet and we can't do anything about it. And it's bad as well, and it's our fault. So you have there both the rejection of responsibility in some sense, in terms of I can't do anything about climate change, really, it's happening and we're all going to die, but also it was your responsibility, right, collectively with everyone in the world, because you drove too many miles in your car, you took too many jet airplane flights, and you burn oil in your gas furnace. So you are responsible collectively with everyone, but also you have no responsibility because it's happening anyway. So it's this double whammy against your own conception of your value and your freedom as a person. And the search for truth. Again, this idea that you can't have an opinion unless you have expertise, TM, right? You must be an expert, TM. And I must be very respectful towards the Europeans in the audience who truly know a lot more about history and geography than I'm sure I will ever know. But, I can still have an opinion. The Americans are people who, and we'll go back to this because I know there was a comment about that from Jasper, There are people who definitely have been the melting pot. Right? There's many, many different cultures and ideologies that have gone in together, and you can say when you put everything together, what do you get? You know, you get kind of a brown goop, not identifiable anymore as anything, right? Used to be a vegetable, maybe. Sort of the stuff we have for, you know, lunch and dinner often here, yeah. But on the other hand, there is a kind of sense of possibility in the American ideology that everyone shares as an American. It's very rare to get an American who actually doesn't believe that the future can be better, and is willing and able mentally to attack the problem of how to make it better in some small way. How do I build a better mousetrap? How do I invent a new product that might, you know, have some market share? And if they fail, they get up again and they try again, generally speaking. There's also patriotism. Thanksgiving and the 4th of July, huge holidays in the United States. No matter your religion, no matter your cultural background, everybody celebrates those two holidays. And those are basically pro-country more than anything, and pro-family and community. So there is still that strong spirit in America, you know, for the whole nation. And I will just give you an anecdote. So I run in Australia the high school economics competition called the Australian Economics Olympiad. And I think it was last year, I gave them I wanted to do a little experiment. I had them all in a room, and I just gave them a question. So if we think that there may be some problem with the health system not delivering good quality health, actual health, as in more high quality life years lived for humans on the planet, health. We're spending a lot of money, we're not getting much of that. What do we do? What is a solution to that problem that you could think of? Every person had some flavor of, well, the government should do X. The government should have more subsidy to that. The government should do more of this kind of program. And I think about 90% of them, it was government should do more. There was no mention of markets. There was no mention of innovation. There was no mention of citizens. There was nothing of the things we're talking about today. Yeah? So, and these are the top economics high school students, supposedly, right? They did very well on an econ exam that we set that was very economics, you know. And maybe you just say, well, all the Australians are idiots, and fair enough, okay, you're European, you have the right to say that. But that really shocked me, right? Not a single really good economics student being able to say, I wonder whether maybe the government's approach could be basically erroneous, and the structures themselves could be altered to include more market forces, to include more citizen voice, to include, you know, various kinds of aspects of more sovereignty, basically, rather than the top down, the bottom up, as Jasper, I think, was saying. So, anyway, that's a bit of background and, you know, the problems that we have in Australia. So how then do we get over this problem? And this is where I'm supposed to be giving you some ideas to take forward into the group discussion, I suppose. So again, you know, mentality, your beliefs about things are what enable or disable you. And one of my favorite sayings is whether a man believes he can or he believes he cannot, he's always right. Just perfect, right? I really love that. So power, where does power come from, right? It doesn't actually come from God. It doesn't actually come from an AI that has become super, 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 super intelligent, but has not developed its own desire to control. If it develops its own desire to control, apart from us, then okay, maybe we're talking about power, right? But that is more, that realm of being kind of above us, but not directly controlling us, because remember, God gave us free will. That kind of notion, that is not political power. Right? Political power is housed in positions within our institutions, which in some sense consolidate the agency of many, 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 many people. Yeah? So when a president or a prime minister takes power, he takes the representation of the agency of all of the people in his country. And he holds that power until he leaves office, and then it's gone. So ultimately, the source of power is in you. It is in you, but it is not one person. So that prime minister himself, one person, doesn't have much power before he steps into office. But then he steps in, he takes on this gauntlet, he holds it for a while, and then when he steps away, his power immediately drops because he's no longer representing the agency of a large number of people. Since the separation of church and state, it has nothing to do with God. It has to do entirely with people, individuals, shall I say, not using the word people for Karen's sake. Yeah? So power is generated by groups of people. That is where power resides. And one of the problems that we've had, big fundamental problems in the West, is forgetting that fact, forgetting that we have strength when we have ourselves, when we have us, a group. That is where the strength and the power to fight against any abuse of power comes from. If that person, that prime minister who takes our agency, misuses it, in other words, uses it against our interests, the only way to fight back against that is to recognize that he is supposedly representing us, but we still have our own agency. Right? We have given it to him temporarily, but we can always say, no, I don't want to do that. And of course, that's what we're supposed to be able to do through democracy. And the efforts to rebuild and redefine and correct democracy are in the direction of trying to reclaim our agency from the existing institutions and also from the existing processes that put those people in power, right? The various ways in which we actually give our agency, or at least loan our agency to actors on our behalf within the state. How that happens is probably in great need of reform. So what do we get when we are then in a group? And I don't just mean in a nation, but in a community, such as the community here at ALM. And many other communities. We have some in Australia that are growing up, as you can imagine. There are communities in America that are recognizing this. Yeah. Well, there's just this huge list of good things. And I would challenge anyone to say, well, as a Robinson Crusoe, as somebody, on my own on an island with my fishing pole or something, I have these things, right? You are a social creature, so you need a little bit of insurance against risks and bottlenecks in your life. What if you happen to fall really sick? If you're a Robinson Crusoe, who's going to take care of you? When you're sleeping, what if a scorpion comes and bites you, right? I mean, you can construct a few defenses yourself. You can construct a house and various physical defenses, but you will have weak points in your life. Right? That will just happen. You'll have a, loss of spirit or something, and you'll need some sort of support, and perhaps you'll be lucky and be touched by God in that moment. But it would be convenient if you had another person there who maybe wasn't having that same illness at the same time. So that sense of insurance that we give each other, it's not weakness to think of that as a positive thing. It is strength to recognize that that exists. Emotional support, right? We can be as strong as we like in our own minds and whatnot, but if we don't have emotional support from other people, our life is lonely. We are social animals. So that loneliness is very hard to replace, even with an AI doll, which they are churning out, apparently, by the millions in Japan, I think, now. But that's one area where I don't think AI is going to dominate eventually. Mate selection, where are you going to find a mate? If you have a couple friends, but you don't really have a home community, and that's often the case for a lot of our young people today. They have these disjointed social circles through social media. They're not even geographically proximate. Where do they find a partner for life? No? They can join dating apps, but they don't really know who they're getting on the other end. It could be, some creepy person who's not even the gender they say they are, right? And interacting like that disables you from being able to interact in a normal way with actual people. If instead you have an actual community where you're going every week or every few days to some function, whether it's dancing or music function or some other thing that brings the community together, well, you can be known by many people who might then know potential partners, and the partners might be in that group. It's just easier. It just simplifies the problem. Right? And it's a hugely important question, who you're going to choose as your life partner, right? That is a big deal question. It determines so much. Employment, childcare, food, and knowledge are all shared and provided within communities. None of these things are best provided at the international level. When you think about what makes a person healthy and happy, almost none of it is provided at the level of the UN or the WHO. Right? That's just not where these processes start. They start locally. The processes that make us happy and well-adjusted, functioning, joyful, productive people with health and spirit and belief in the future, these things begin at home, locally. The forces that built the cathedrals that dot all over Europe, right? Those forces did not start internationally. They started regionally, right? Locally. And yes, people believed in a higher power. That was what motivated them. But they collectively all worked together, often across, as you know, centuries, to build something. So you weren't ever going to even see the thing you were contributing to. But my goodness, how inspiring to know that your effort was going to build something so great that would serve people for so many centuries to come. That kind of inspiration, we need that. And it is very hard to get that from a supranational political body, right? We're never going to worship the WHO. And, you know, we are actually, therefore, stronger and we are freer when we accept willingly that we belong not just to ourselves, but to one another. We hold each other's happiness and we try to help each other through life, supporting each other along the way, giving and taking strength and weakness as it comes across our decks. Yeah? And it will. No one person can possibly just do this alone. And that's a wonderful and beautiful thing. That's a joyful thing. And it's not something to cringe away from or think, I don't want those people. Well, sorry, you're stuck with humanity. You're stuck with us. Not necessarily this community. If you don't like us, fine, go someplace else. But you're stuck with some other human beings. Or you're stuck trying to be the Robinson Crusoe who's just never going to be happy, healthy, and really fully functional, fully developed, and as strong as he could be. He will never. He will never. So how do we then instead express that concept of personal empowerment? How do you think about your life when you see all these constraints initially? You're thinking as a victim. How do you change that into thinking as somebody who has agency and some degree of personal autonomy? I'm going to keep trying in spite of the challenges I face. Okay, there's a challenge there, there's a challenge there, there's a challenge there. And maybe I have failed a few times. Maybe some of those challenges are in my own head. Can I do this? Just believe in yourself. Yes, I can do it. Or I can do it with the help of someone else. You know, assess the situation and don't blame yourself. Forgive yourself instantly for your mistakes, but recognize, okay, that means I need to do something different. Pivot, do that. Keep trying, yeah? And then you won't feel like a victim. The more time you spend as a victim, the less time you have to actually achieve good things. I'll make the best choice I can. The best choice I can. It may not be the perfect choice, but you show me a perfect choice. Almost every choice we make has consequences, not all of which are uniformly positive. Right? There's always a little bit of a collateral effect of almost everything. Right? So recognize that's just the nature of human choice. That's the nature of the world. There are always give and takes, trade-offs, scarcity, opportunity cost, as we would say in economics. That's never not true. So don't focus on the barrier. You know, you'll run right over it. Like when you have a bicycle, right, and you look at the pebble and oh, I got to avoid it. You go right over it. Right? Don't look at the pebble. Just don't look at it. Right? Look at the paths around the pebble. Yeah. Look at the paths around the pebble. One of the examples I love, I think I gave this in the lectures this week, was my son used to play piano. Oh, well, he still plays a lot of piano. But in high school, he'd be playing, and when we had a little set of guidance statements on the piano for him, and one of them said, what do strong pianists do as opposed to weak pianists? Well, weak pianists, when they sit down to give a performance, they kind of react and try to correct for mistakes as they occur. Huh? Endogenously reacting, that's a weak pianist mentality. The strong pianist, before he even touches the keyboard, before he even sits down, he has a perfect mental image of what the perfect performance will look like. And he moves towards that image as he performs. Totally different attitude. He could be thinking instead, oh, I could screw up. Oh, I could do this. Oh, the piano's not exactly right. Oh, this feels a little bit uncomfortable on my backside. Right? Lots of things he could be thinking, this is not perfect. It's a little bit hot in here. Oh, yeah, sure. Welcome to life, right? But instead you say, I can do the best that I can do, and here's my image of what I'm going for. I'm going to attack that. I'm going to move towards that. And it's a liberating mindset. I accept some agency, and hence I bear some responsibility myself. You may feel like that's a burden. Right? I have responsibility. Ugh. And that's, unfortunately, I think the way a lot of people in the West still feel. They feel, and this is one of the reasons they don't join movements to try to restore their society, is that they feel that that's just too much effort. I think we were having this conversation. There's this laziness about, oh, I just don't want to have to worry about politics and deciding things and institutions. It's still too hard. I don't really want to even think about it because it kind of hurts my brain. So there's a desire to free oneself from that responsibility, but that is a self-limiting choice. You are putting yourself into the position of if not slave, at least pawn. Pawn in a broader game. And this notion that my community, my family, my group, whatever that is a source of meaning and happiness and opportunities, whether professional or personal opportunities for me. Warts and all. No community, no family, no group is perfect. I'll tell you some stories about some of my cousins. Oh boy, right? But they're my cousins. These are my people. Yeah. This is where I come from. It is where I belong, and I will keep persevering, and I'll try to appreciate that even in their darkest moments, they can still potentially provide me with insight. We can still have an exchange. And when I am feeling down, they can help me. And there's this, again, this trading off. And this sense of identity. Who am I? You know, I mean, I might say, well, I'm an economist, but I'm also, you know, a half-sister. I'm a wife. I'm a daughter. I'm a mother. Right? I'm a friend. I'm many things. And these things are what keep me grounded and give me a sense of identity. If one doesn't believe in a higher power, one can at least believe in the goodness and the sort of infinite potential of belonging to a community and contributing to that community, seeing that community thrive. Identifying with a community expands us. It expands our notion of self. I am not just sort of some independent sovereign me. A large part of my brain is now mother. And therefore, some smallish part of my brain, probably, but still significant, is Sienna, literally, or Neil, my son. These people are in me. They are me. When they hurt, I hurt. When they are happy, I am happy. That is belonging to each other. And it's something not to resist. It doesn't mean you're diluting yourself. You then can draw on the power and the beauty and the talent and the agency and the hope and wonder and potential of all of those other people. You cannot access it any other way. You must allow yourself to love. That love, that thing, that motivation, which is so different from the power and greed that we wrote about, you know, almost 10 years ago now, 12 years ago. That is the motivation that will show you opportunity when you would have otherwise seen constraint. So, you know, it would be nice to discuss in groups what really is individual freedom and individual identity. Are those things contradictions in terms? If not, how do we define them? How do we come to an understanding of those things ourselves that doesn't exclude our own development and progress? So I'll just give a couple of examples. So one example is one that you probably know, the US Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. Yeah, this is a very big deal in the United States. There's a huge debate about whether or not it's appropriate in the modern day and age when, you know, guns are extremely lethal, much more lethal than they were when the Constitution was first written, and certainly when the Second Amendment was written. And the thing I want to draw to your attention here is, here's the wording: a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, perhaps we should have said the right of the individuals, just to get around the Karen problem, yeah. But what do you see in here that may be a bit different from the interpretation of the Second Amendment that you see in some of the conversations about it in the States? What word strikes you in that Second Amendment? Militia. Well-regulated, absolutely. So a well-regulated militia. So we have a militia, first of all, not a human being, not a single person, but a community, right? A group of people, generally in a region, generally a bunch of men who had guns, who would self-regulate or be regulated in some way to ensure that those guns were used in a protective fashion rather than in a destructive fashion. That was the idea, necessary to the security of a free state. So we're aiming for security as a group, and we know that there have to be some regulations around this from some place. Could be endogenous, could be from the top, wherever, but there has to be some regulation. It's not a free-for-all. It's not, well, give me a gun and over my dead body, will you take it away? No, it's, okay, we know these things are dangerous. I mean, these men really knew the guns were dangerous. Most of these men would have served in military combat at some point in their lives. It was a much more violent era. Yeah? But we still need them because other people are going to attack us and try to take our stuff if we don't have this. How do we organize this? Well, we get together as a community. We have the older men teaching the younger men what to do, how to do things, how to handle the gun, how to use it. And within that context, we must have a right to bear arms. But we don't have that kind of debate about, have the guns and also shooting people in schools and things like this. Debate is avoided because it's become a socially useful institution. Whereas we have, again, children dying in schools and all sorts of things. A homicide rate by gun violence is, as you know, orders of magnitude above what you have anywhere else in the world, because we've forgotten about this thing and this thing. Just forgotten about the first part of that Second Amendment. And the second example is the Amish. Anybody know about the Amish? Yeah, good. So I was actually just in Amish country, and seeing these plain people coming along with their carriages and having their little markets, the quilts and all these things. And I used to go to an Amish farm a week every summer when I was a little girl. And so I saw how they lived. And the thing about them is, of course, they have their own, very, very strong sense of community norms and values, very centered on God, but also just very kind of disarmingly open about the rest of the world as well. So this Amish, farm that I went to, they would embrace children from the city slicker kids like me. Every summer, they'd have weeks and weeks of kids coming through, helping with the harvesting, helping with the planting, the goat milking, the slopping of the pigs, all that stuff. Sienna even went there once. And, it's this wonderful openness that they have. It's not a cloistered sort of, stay away kind of thing. They're open to the other world. In fact, they send their young people out into the regular world for a period of time when, they're old enough to know what they're doing, and they hope that they're going to come back. But it's their choice. Many of them do come back, and they are growing hugely. This community has a pretty high fertility rate, certainly relative to the West. They're doing really well. Now you can say, well, I don't want to be constrained by having to wear that stupid bonnet, right? Okay, fine, but what do you care about in terms of human success? What are you looking for? Are you looking for a place to be able to experience joy and connection with other people, have culture of your own, believe in something outside of yourself, be productive, be reasonably healthy? COVID didn't affect these people at all, basically, right? And raise your children in a healthy, outside-oriented kind of environment? That's not too bad. Yeah.
The most healthy people in America because they're not vaccinated.
No vaxxed. Yeah. No vax. Now, they also have to use like horse and carriage. That would be a real pain, right? Sure. But if you're only going in a certain area, it doesn't really matter. They don't need to go to Chicago or something. Okay, so I want to just briefly, how much time do I have? Probably 1 minute? 5 minutes? 5 minutes. Okay, so I want to give you just a brief little review, and this will be maybe some inspiration for some of the conversations this afternoon. So these are some of the communities that I've started to, with other people, try to bring to life and try to activate in different places of the world. So obviously you all know Academia Libera Mentis, the most radical and hopeful higher education initiative I think there is in the world right now. Brownstone Institute I've spoken of in the United States, so that was just a very recently developed libertarian think tank, and I would encourage you to look at it. They constantly publish writing, blogs on all sorts of different aspects of restoring the West. And more broadly, so brownstone.org. And then this organization, Australians for Science and Freedom, is something I co-founded a couple of years ago. It's a cross-disciplinary, what we call free think tank in Australia, where we have a website and we have events, we have in-person conferences, events, and we aim to be a place where we collectively, not just a couple of us, we all can dream about and write down ideas for how we would like different systems to run differently than they are now. So a new health system, what would it look like? A new education system, what would it look like? A new legal system. If we were to establish a new nation state, what would the institutions look like? How would we set up democracy? What would we establish? How would it be? So all of these questions that are about how, what is the next step? What's that next, stage of the revolution or whatever that we're going to, move through and we're going to get to, whether it's in 2030 or something else, what does that society look like? So what are we doing? Just a few little things. First of all, cultural resuscitation. So this is a huge one. Bringing back dance and shared art and kind of shared ideas, and this idea of the salon is a perfect example, right? And the dancing later. We had a barn dance a few months ago. We've done singing things. So many different cultural elements, trying to remember essentially what made the West great was that kind of thing, bringing culture and upholding culture, and the kind of culture that we have is very appealing to many people. So that's one of the great things about Western culture. You can almost, you can share it with anybody. You can show anybody the Mona Lisa and they kind of like, oh, right? It's very relatable. You don't really need to know much. You can be from a completely different corner of the world. You can even be an American. And you look at the Mona Lisa and you think, that's a cool piece of art. Right? We, of course, support independent information dissemination, so separate from the mainstream press. So we have our blogs, there's a newspaper, an alternative newspaper in Australia, many, many independent podcasts and radio station sort of things where you can get alternative news and alternative perspectives and opinions, right? You may call it news. News makes it sound like, these are the new things. Determined by whom, right? I think a lot of the time it's old things. So I would say just information dissemination. Matchmaking service. So there's a woman named Katie Faust in the United States who came out to speak in Australia a few weeks ago. And she has started up a new matchmaking service in the US where young people who are of independent mind and just recognize that the dating market these days is garbage, send her a description of themselves, what they're looking for, their interests, blah, blah, and then she matches them herself personally. And this is a lady, she's like a pastor's wife in Oregon or something, right? She has like 5 kids herself. And she just puts them together and then she says, look, if I match you, you commit to spending 3 one-hour dates with this person, either online or in person. And it can be that it's in different geographies, in which case somebody's going to have to move if you really get along. But that's the desperation of the young people today. And people are really willing to do this. She's been really, she's had a lot of interest. So I'd like to start something like this in Australia for our youth as well. As I mentioned before, institutional blueprints. So brainstorming, what could these blueprints look like? Not just dictating, the person who thinks he knows this is how it's going to be, but actively stimulating everybody's minds. Go in your vault of information about the human condition and tell me, what do you think we need to have in this kind of institution, in that kind of institution? And bring that knowledge together and work through the issues and the problems and the possible consequences and pilot some things, and you're going to fail. 80% of new ideas fail, right? But give yourself permission to do that and believe in the ability of the human organism to make progress together. Yeah? And then try them out. And then, of course, higher education. Here, Academia Libera Mentis aimed at providing a place where young people can take up and then pro-socially apply useful knowledge, not just knowledge of, some people who are scribbling on a whiteboard in a back room and want us to believe that it's important, whatever they're studying, but knowledge that's useful to humanity, knowledge that helps us to build. Okay, so I think I'll stop there. That's my email address if anybody wants to get in touch. Thank you.